We've sacrificed a lot this year. We've stayed home, worn masks, canceled plans with friends and family. Some of us have lost those loved ones, and others have been sick for months.
It's not going to go away. It's just hard. It's really hard.
So tonight, we're focusing on the sacrifices of COVID-19 as we wait for a vaccine and a way out of this pandemic. Here's the story.
And I'm Dan Haggerty. Welcome to The Story. Taking a little more of a somber tone to the start of tonight's show, so good news to all of you who hate our usual music. As always, I want to hear from you during the show, so send me an email at thestory@kgw.com. You can also hit us up on Facebook, leave a comment there, use the hashtag HeyDan on Twitter. Now, like I said, we want to focus tonight on the sacrifices that so many of us have had to make during this pandemic. And for some, those sacrifices go deeper than for others. Yesterday was Pearl Harbor Day, of course, which we spent a lot of time talking about. And I want to read this comment that we got from Marcy on Twitter. 2,400 Americans, she said, died at Pearl Harbor and unified this country in its effort to fight in World War II. The same number of Americans die every day in this country of COVID, and we are more divided than ever. What is wrong with us? Yeah, when you put it like that, I guess it is pretty staggering. Now, here's something else I want to show you that's getting a lot of attention on Twitter. It's an obituary from Kansas written by the son of a man who died from COVID. It reads, Dr. Marvin James Farr, 81, of Scott City, Kansas, passed away December 1, 2020. In isolation at Park Lane Nursing Home. He was preceded in death by more than 260,000 Americans infected with COVID-19. He died in a room, not his own, being cared for by people dressed in confusing and frightening ways. He died with COVID-19, and his final days were harder, scarier, and lonelier than necessary. He was not surrounded by friends and family. Goes on to talk about how Marvin lived through the sacrifices of the Great Depression and World War II. Then it says, he died in a world where many of his fellow Americans refused to wear a piece of cloth on their face to protect one another. So the point is, throughout our history, we've had to make sacrifices to get through the hard times. And now is no different. And that brings us to our big story tonight, which is a look at where we are right now with COVID-19. And I want to start by talking with our hospital situation. Now, the good news is right now in our area, in the Portland area specifically, relatively good shape when it comes to capacity compared to other places in the country. Now, the bad news is that could, of course, change if cases keep surging.
We have seen a dramatic increase in COVID hospitalizations over the last month. If you project that forward, our beds are going to be filled. And so what we really need is for people to understand that the actions they take today can reduce hospitalizations in the future and thus preserve our hospital capacity.
Now, here's some context for you as we talk about hospital capacity. So there's this new federal database that lets you look up the numbers of beds that are available in hospitals across the country, and the system uses a 7-day average. It shows OHSU has 37 beds available. Providence St. Vincent has 64 open beds, Providence Portland has 62 beds, and Legacy Emmanuel has 63 beds available. So what does that mean? Well, Pat Doris talked to the interim chief medical officer for Legacy Health about the info and how you should absorb it.
Those numbers include not just our medical surge beds or our ICU beds, but kind of anybody that's in the hospital. So it could include people that are there for a day surgery. It's a snapshot. So it could be there for people who were in surgery but now are, out of surgery and recovering. So it's not just people that are in beds that are there for several days. So it's a little bit more complex than just someone who's there. So is definitely very fluid. So we could have 10 admits in a day, to your point. We could have 2 admits in a day. We could have 5 COVID patients. We could have 10 COVID patients. So I think it's hard to really speculate what does that number actually mean, because it changes constantly. I know it's a 7-day average, and it includes the more broad work of the system as opposed to just people who are like in a medical surge bed, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And are there any like tripwires? If you get down to 5 available beds, does that send off alarms and new plans and that sort of thing?
Sure, we would certainly put in new plans before we got down to 5 beds. So we have definitely triggers all along of how many of which kind of beds we have and what's our expectation if, how long people may be there if they have COVID versus other diagnoses. So we definitely have triggers of when we would start to change our surgery projections more or flip over other kinds of beds as needed.
But let's remember, the majority of people who get COVID don't go to the hospital, but that doesn't always mean that they're in the clear.
And the brain thing, oh my God, it's so weird. You can't concentrate. You can't figure anything out. You can't remember the day before. And it's so frustrating. That's why people are suicidal that have it, is like they don't think they're going to get well and it's never going to go away. So I always try to tell them, you're lucky you're not in the hospital. It's going to go away.
Most people recover from COVID within weeks, but this week we're hearing from those people who have not. A recent study has said that after about a month of being sick with COVID, roughly 10% of cases kind of have lingering symptoms, and sometimes they're unique, things like hair loss or pounding heartbeats or joint pain. Morgan Romero highlights the struggle in COVID, the long haul, and today we're hearing Lori's story. Now, Morgan, we heard from Lori and she was talking about memory issues and the struggle she's having with fatigue. Considering this is novel and new for doctors studying it, how do they even go about treating these long haulers?
Yeah, those symptoms that you just mentioned are actually very common, and doctors can treat people with a variety of medications, but of course it depends on the individual person and the symptoms that they're dealing with. People are experiencing really rare things that are impacting a variety of organs like their kidney and their heart and their lungs and their brain, sometimes leading to long-term health problems. For people struggling to breathe, though, doctors will give them inhalers, sometimes prednisone steroids. That helps some people. Long haulers are figuring it out as they go too. They give each other a lot of suggestions and support in these Facebook groups like Survivor Corps and Long COVID. Some say all they can do is sleep, rest, and drink water. Really only time can heal. One guy I talked to, though, said an anti-inflammatory diet helps. Others say aspirin helps with the headaches. Other people say that vitamin D really helps with their immune system and to protect themselves. Others, again, vitamin D, a supplement, people are really turning to supplements like Lori Wika-Heinrichs.
So I started taking zinc and vitamin C and vitamin B, and then it started making me feel better. The zinc, something about the zinc started making me I could tell I was getting stronger. But now that was July, August, September, October. I was still feeling weird. It just gets you. So you can't keep that positivity. And I know I'm not well, and I know there's a chance of relapse because a lot of these people had that break, like a couple months break, and then they got the body aches, everything all over again. But I'm just going to keep taking the vitamins and doing the rest and drinking the water. And if I relapse, I relapse. But it's not going to get to me.
So I'm getting the sense that a lot of these cases are very unique. Does that make it more difficult, or is there anything that doctors or scientists can compare what we're seeing with these long haulers to anything we've studied in the past?
So they can't really predict long-term health outcomes because this is so new. It's only been around for the last year, and they're going to continue to monitor it and watch. However, they can look at similar viruses like the coronavirus that caused the SARS outbreak in the early 2000s and say, hey, what happened to people that recovered here? And when they look at people that recovered from SARS, they see a lot of them developed chronic fatigue syndrome. That essentially means that you get really fatigued after doing some form of physical or mental exertion, and rest doesn't really seem to help. So doctors are looking at this as a post-viral syndrome that they're going to continue to study for the months to come.
Interesting. Okay, Morgan, thank you.
You bet.
Now, you guys send us a lot of questions, which we love. We try to answer as many as we can. This past week, we got so many about the COVID vaccine, which could get approved in the U.S. this week. So here's Kristen Severance with a few answers.
Dan, we have some great questions tonight. I mean, we always have really good questions, but I really love when the story viewers email and they ask us about things that we previously reported or something that the state previously reported, like this one. So Mark emailed asking, how can you be talking about receipt of vaccines, etc., when first of all, the FDA must approve, but more importantly for Oregonians, the Western States Pact requires an additional layer of scientific review be conducted by its experts. Thank you again, Mark, for that that question, he's right. Oregon did announce plans to join with California, Washington, and Nevada to conduct an independent review of the vaccine before it's administered to anyone in any of those states. Now, we reached out to the Oregon Health Authority, and a spokesman told us that independent review process is well underway as the FDA finishes its emergency use review process. The FDA has released more than 100 pages of data from the Pfizer vaccine trials, and the Western States Scientific Safety Review Work Group is analyzing that data ahead of December 15th, when Oregon expects to get thousands of vials of the vaccine for healthcare workers. Joe Sullivan, a senior health advisor with the OHA, told me this extra step should make people feel even more secure with the process.
To add one more layer of security, that before vaccine gets to Oregon, that we all feel safe and comfortable that every step has been taken, every T crossed and I dotted.
And this independent review will not slow down the current vaccine plans for Oregon or Washington or any of the other Western states in that group. Okay, next question here. What happens if the COVID-19 vaccines that require refrigeration accidentally warm up? Short answer, this would not be good. Both the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine need to be kept very cold. Pfizer needs to be kept in an ultra cold freezer, -70 to -80 degrees. Moderna needs to be kept in a regular freezer. Those ultra cold freezers are in high demand right now, as you can imagine. I talked to Jeremy Wise, an associate professor and chair of biology at Linfield University. They have 2 ultra cold freezers on campus, and they are loaning one to Yamhill County health officials to store the vaccine. He said it's the least they could do. I also asked him, what happens if the vaccine is not properly stored or it gets warm, like our viewer asked.
If you don't store it cold enough, the molecule itself will break down, and that makes the vaccine useless.
They expect to loan that ultra cold freezer for the next 6 months to a year. And then our last question here, is it true that if you get the COVID-19 virus and recover from it, you are then immune? Okay, so we can answer that one. That is not true. So far, experts advise that individuals who have gotten sick with COVID-19 in the past should still get the vaccine due to risk of reinfection. The CDC said they do not know how long natural immunity after recovering from the virus lasts. Natural immunity varies from person to person. So the advice right now from the CDC, plan on getting it. Hope that answers some of your questions. Do you have a question? I'm sure you do. Let us know. Just use everyone's favorite hashtag, HeyDan.
All right, keep those questions coming. Now, before we go to break, I do want to talk about a situation that's happening in North Portland along Mississippi Avenue, where protesters have taken over a residential street because a black indigenous family is being evicted from a foreclosed home that foreclosed when they stopped paying a loan that they leveraged against the house. Now, protesters rallied around this family. They set up a camp around the house for the past couple of months, actually. Then, this morning, police raided that area and arrested people for trespassing. And in response, more protesters have now shown up, and they built a barricade blocking the street. You're looking at some video from what happened earlier today. Now, I'd like to show you some of our video from our cameras inside that area, but protesters won't let us in. They're threatening journalists, and they're physically removing them from the area. Now, if you could step back, I think, from your initial thoughts, which I'm sure are kind of hovering around your opinions of protesters and police, I'd like to talk about really what they're fighting this fight for in particular. Protesters think that it's unconscionable to displace a family during COVID because they couldn't pay the bills. After all, there is a moratorium in place to protect people from this sort of thing for that very reason, except that this specific eviction began before that moratorium went into place. And the financial hardships that this family is being troubled by were not a symptom of this pandemic. The foreclosure predates the coronavirus. They have been living in this home that's owned by an investment company. But protesters aren't really concerned with who owns the home, are they? They're fighting for the people who lived there. And while this isn't really a textbook case of gentrification, most of the neighborhood does fit the bill. It used to be mostly black, now it's mostly white. So here we are again. Another standoff in Portland that pits policy and ideology with accusations of hypocrisy being screamed from both sides. We'll stay on top of it for you. When the story continues, a lot of you have been asking about our homeless crisis, so we got an update for you on a new shelter. Plus, we spent a lot of time talking about Pearl Harbor yesterday, but one of our viewers pointed out we should also talk about the dark period in our history right after that, when the U.S. forced Japanese Americans into internment camps. That's next. Hey, welcome back. I spend most of the commercials reading people's comments. You know, a great way to get in touch with me is on my Facebook page. You can just search Dan Haggerty KGW, give me a follow, send me a message. We also post a link to every show on there, so it's easy to pretty much check out something if you've missed it. Now, I know a lot of people are concerned with our ongoing homeless crisis. We get emails about it all the time, and of course, it's something that's only gotten worse during this pandemic. And now that it's really cold out, it can be dangerous for those people living on the streets. But there's a new temporary shelter opening this week in an area of Portland where the crisis is really bad. Tim Gordon has a look.
From Greyhound Station to vacant eyesore, now the old bus terminal is breathing new life again inside.
This Portland institution of the Greyhound Station, we have transformed it.
Transition Projects has turned the rundown terminal into a 24-hour winter shelter.
So we're opening on Thursday, and we'll be serving men, women, and couples and their pets.
Stacy Bork says the shelter will prioritize those 55 and older, the disabled, and veterans for its 90 beds. And it will focus on getting people off the street in Old Town Chinatown.
We know that there's a lot of people sleeping unsheltered just on the blocks around us, and so we're thankful for a large space that's really centrally located.
Old Town has been in decline for a long time. Today, homeless camping can dominate the landscape and frustrate residents and businesses. The shelter is a welcome change, according to Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler.
It is an underutilized asset in a key area. I think it's an important step towards getting people off the sidewalks in Old Town Chinatown. And having visited that area many times myself, being very familiar with it, I can tell you that it is one of the highest priority zones in the city of Portland. There is a serious problem with the number of tents in Old Town Chinatown.
The Joint Office of Homeless Services says with the new beds here, there will be 275 winter beds open 24/7 through March. The downtown physical distancing winter shelter will be by reservation only. Outreach workers are signing people up now for a safe place to live and get help during the difficult winter we see coming.
This year, as we've been, managing through this pandemic, having additional beds is critical.
Well, with the opening, Portland and Multnomah County will have twice as many of these types of shelter beds as they did last year. And of course, it's not the only type of help. But you look around and more needs to be done. The mayor says they're looking at everything from safe camping zones to buying and transforming hotels to get more people off the street. Tim Gordon, KGW News.
Now, I know one of your favorite segments is the KGW Vault, where we dig into some of our archives and find some old stories. Let me know if you have any ideas. Send me an email using the hashtag HeyDan. We love going down there and rooting around. Now, last night we aired a Vault coverage of an Oregon football team, a college team that happened to be in Hawaii when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. The Willamette Bearcats were there for a bowl game, but they ended up getting called into action by the military when martial law was declared. If you missed the story, check it out. It's on our YouTube channel right now. Now, we got a ton of great feedback about that story. Sarah tweeted us and said, "Hey Dan, thanks for the Willamette story. My dad was number 17. Mush Barber." I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Wow, that's crazy that your dad was actually there. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Erin has a family connection too. She tweeted, "Hey Dan, the vault is always my favorite, but tonight I got to see my own family history. My grandpa was on the USS West Virginia, which was sunk. He survived, but was shipped back to San Francisco where my grandma waited for him." It's pretty cool seeing that footage of it all. And I'm from West Virginia, so that's a cool connection too. We love hearing about your family history. Thank you so much for sharing these. And again, if you want to see that, it's on KGW's YouTube channel right now. If you want us to look for something else in the vault, please just let us know. We love doing these segments. We also got this email from Amy that I thought was important to share. "I appreciated your story about the football players traumatized while in Hawaii during and after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. I also hope that today or this week you will share stories of what the Japanese American communities and their family and friends faced at the time, and which ultimately led to thousands of innocent people being imprisoned in internment camps throughout World War II." Thank you for your email, Amy. It was a very dark, horrific, and local piece of history that we definitely need to talk talk about. On February 19th, 1942, FDR signed an executive order that forced more than 100,000 Japanese Americans into internment camps. Most of these camps were here in this area on the West Coast. There was a temporary camp here in Portland for a time where these photos, the photo that you see here, was taken. After that, Japanese Americans in Oregon were sent to internment camps out of state in Idaho or California. There's a ton of history on life inside these camps for Oregonians on the Secretary of State's website if you want to go on and check that out. A few years ago, during an anniversary ceremony of FDR's executive order, we heard from family members of internment survivors here in Portland.
And the family was taken to the Portland Assembly Center, from there Tule Lake, and then from there Minidoka.
It was a result of race prejudice and war hysteria and a failure of political leadership. What happens to one person happens to all of us. They're heartbroken because they never thought that they would hear the same sentiment and see these things being repeated.
And that last comment was in reference to President Trump's travel ban back in 2017, which you'll remember temporarily stopped people from 7 predominantly Muslim countries from getting visas to travel to the U.S. Courts eventually struck down that ban. All right, I know you probably got your phone in your hand. It's okay. It's how I watch TV nowadays, too. So during the break, send me your thoughts about the show. Tell me what you're thinking. I'm going to end with some of your comments next. Plus, are you a real tree person or a fake tree person? Come on, you can tell us. I want to know when the story continues. I know we live in the land of evergreens. I get it. But I got a fake tree, okay? I'm a fake Christmas tree guy. There, I posted it on my Facebook page. I got quite a conversation going in the comments. I was actually really surprised that so many people in this area were willing to admit to having a fake tree. That's kind of blasphemy in the Pacific Northwest. So are you team real tree or are you team fake tree with me? Let me know. Get on my Facebook page, search Dan Haggerty KGW, and let's get the conversation going. Of course, we're talking about more than just trees on that Facebook page, but that's a fun one. I think we need a little bit of light conversation every now and then. People were saying that they don't get real trees because of the bugs inside. I grew up with a real tree in West Virginia every year. I don't ever remember bugs. I've seen that movie where the squirrel comes out, though. Hey, let's talk. Tell me what you want to see covered here on the story, and that's it for tonight. Use that hashtag, HeyDan. I'll see you back here tomorrow.